Hey everybody, welcome to RotoCurve Live for Week 11, as always presented by Rosters.com. If you have not signed up on Rosters yet, please be sure to head over there and try the promo code CURVE for an instant, not a slow drip, an instant $20 on your initial $10 deposit. As always, it's Friday here, which what we're going to do is we're going to talk about NFL DFS. You can hear with myself, Josh Collacchi, also Adam Pfeifer, and we're glad to welcome back Jim McCormick after a 1-week hiatus. Glad to have him back as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about our favorite plays for this week. We're going to give you some bold calls at the end, as every RC Live show does, and let's hopefully strike some gold as we did a few weeks ago with somebody having a dream. Every single week, RC Live, we have to talk about somebody having a dream. Jim saw Sammy Coates having 2 touchdowns, and Adam dreamt about it. So we'll hopefully find out one of these two guys can have one of these maybe subconscious dreams on who will succeed. So with that being said, let's just jump right into it. NFL DFS, Week 11, quarterbacks. Jim, let's start with you. Welcome back, buddy.
What's up, man? Thank you so much. Yeah, I missed the week because my wife's wonderful grandmother passed away. But listen, 99 and passed away in her sleep. I mean, we can only pray for that kind of life.
Yeah, no kidding.
So God bless her. But I'm going with Marcus Mariota as my quarterback. I know Adam does not like this guy at all. No, it's actually he's a loyalist to the Church of Mariota. But really, I mean, there's just some awesome stats that just surfaced this week. I mean, they've been building the whole time. But Paul Collacchi for the ESPN put out like a stats package with the aid of ESPN Stats and Info, and basically what Mariota's doing in the red zone over his career is just ridiculous. The game slows down for him. I think for a lot of guys, there's a lot of comparisons for him, and this may be blasphemy, but one of the things about Mariota when he flushes out of the pocket, it's very Rodgers-esque, at least in his prime, in the sense that the game slows down for him. He's able to identify really the correct read in the end zone. You've seen so many plays with Aaron Rodgers where it looks like there's nothing, and then he finds the touchdown. Well, Mariota has 30 touchdowns and 0 interceptions in the red zone in his career. He's taken 2 sacks in his career in the red zone. He's got 117 quarterback rating. I mean, the guy's basically unbeatable. He's like playing your little cousin in Madden when it comes to being in the red zone. So a lot of this has been fueled. That's why you see this strange touchdown rate. I think sometimes we beg for a correction or a regression when you see a guy like Mariota putting up so many touchdowns without the volume passing game. Well, at some point we have to start, just understanding that this guy's abnormally good at producing touchdowns compared to his volume. He's not going to have that pass volume of 45, 50 passes, but he is going to be a 30, 35 touchdown guy, especially this year. He's on pace for that. So I just think that it supports it. The fact that the Colts have given up, the 4th most points per drive. They give up a touchdown on 27% of drives. They're a soft defense, obviously. It's a familiar defense. And, I mean, you guys can attest to this. He's not even doing it with the legs yet. So if he does run it all, it only adds to the floor. But, yeah, he's got 19 touchdowns since week 5, the most in football. And I don't think he has one particular superstar, but his offense kind of reminds me of last year's Cam breakout, where there wasn't one identifiable superstar doing all the work. But, between Walker and Rashard Matthews and even like Kendall Wright's catching some touchdowns, there's just a lot to like, especially with his running game helping support play action. So it's a long pitch, but basically Mariota to me has a chance to be the number 1 quarterback, and he's priced in that middle tier.
Yeah, I'm with you. There's nothing I can say to argue the contrary there. Adam, you have any more points you want to touch on? Because I know Mariota is your favorite player and probably your best friend. He just doesn't know it yet.
Nah, I'm not even gonna talk about him anymore. Just he's been the best quarterback in fantasy since week 5, pretty much, with Tom Brady, and he's still under 7K on DraftKings and gets another great matchup. Yeah, and to test what Jim said about the red zone stuff, Tennessee's scoring a touchdown on 76% of the red zone trips, the highest rate in the league. Nobody would have seen that coming entering the year. So it really is a testament to him and DeMarco Murray and just how good he is in that role.
Is there any other quarterbacks in that tier you want to target this week, Adam, or are you looking to go a little bit cheaper?
Yeah, I mean, in that same game, I love Andrew Luck. I mean, I was on the rotation on Fantasy Network with Gary and Thorne, and he asked me who do I like more if I had to pick, Mariota or Luck, and it was really tough, but I had to stick with my hashtag brand. But Luck is right there for me. He's coming off a bye. He was the quarterback 1 last time these two teams faced. 53-point total in this game. We know the Colts trail a lot in games, so it only helps his upside and floor in terms of passing volume. And Tennessee's secondary has been really bad the last couple weeks. I think T.Y. Hilton can get after it against Parrish Cox and company. Moncrief's back, which helps his touchdowns. So yeah, Luck's one of my favorite guys for sure this week. And then we'll get to my other quarterback later, but it shouldn't shock anybody since he's off the bye.
Yeah, one other guy I wanted to mention here, just simply as a pivot for those of you that like to play contrarian and be more of a game theory-based lineup maker. I like Matt Stafford, and it's funny because Adam actually touched on him in his pivots piece, his GPP piece this morning on RotoCurve, but I do like the fact that he's priced $100 cheaper than Marcus Mariota on both sites. Now, do I think I would use him over Mariota? No. But in tournament lineups, you can use him as a great pivot because there is a chance that all the touchdowns could be scored by DeMarco Murray against that horrid Colts defense. So I think an excellent way to use a game theory in terms of GPPs and being contrarian. I really like Stafford against the Jaguars. The guy's thrown 318 passes in 9 games. This team passes to run. It's an excellent way to do so because he does have Theo Riddick, who we will talk about later. And I definitely think that there's a way to kind of exploit this matchup because the Jaguars' defense has not been as bad in terms of fantasy points allowed as in years past. But there's something to be said about Stafford with the volume of passes he's throwing, with the weapons that he has. Believe it or not, without Calvin Johnson, he's been much more efficient. And we know that when they get to the red zone, they're going to be passing as well. So I think the chances for touchdowns is here. And if Mariota happens to have a 300-yard day but no touchdowns with Murray stealing them all, I think Stafford is a great game theory play piece.
Yeah, and you talked about passing a run. I mean, Jacksonville's defense has been one of the best in the league in terms of limiting big plays. I mean, they don't allow a lot of yards per attempt or completion, and then we know that's what, unless they're going to Marvin Jones, who kills me to say it's kind of faded out the last month or so. Unless they're throwing to Marvin Jones, they're throwing short, and Detroit also passes the highest rate in the NFL when they're ahead. So when they're ahead in games, it's not like they're giving it to Theo Riddick and Zach Zenner and just bleeding the clock. So. Yeah, Stafford, obviously I've run him up, but he's one of my favorite tournament plays because he's in that price range where you can just go up a little more to get Mariota or go down to get somebody else we'll talk about. I know Jim likes, and people are going to be off him. I know ownership percentage doesn't really matter too much at quarterbacks because it's usually spread out, but he's really interesting to me this week.
Yeah,
Good question. Go ahead, Jim.
I think something with Stafford, Ricky and I touched on this in the quarterbacks breakdown, is that there's kind of an old Saints vibe to this Detroit team where it's difficult to tell who's going to benefit on the other end of Stafford each week. And I think that actually, like what Adam was saying, that plays into him having lower interest in ownership. I mean, sometimes that inability to read and that unpredictability in terms of who the right stack is, it actually works in your favor in tournaments because if you can get it right, then there's an ability to differentiate. So I kind of like that angle. I like another guy in that same game. I like Bortles. He's the ultimate chasm between bad player and good fantasy numbers. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but under this new Nathaniel Hackett offense, they're passing the ball 47 times a game. It's a small sample, but you go back his past 4 games, 46 times a game. They can't run. They pass to run. I mean, Yeldon's even splitting out in the slot lately. I mean, it's very difficult for them to really get anything going without having to pass the ball. Plus, they're dogs in a game with a 47-point spread inside. I could see, the Lions have a 27-point implied total, so you can see them getting up. I just, again, see garbage time here. I mean, look, he's got 19 points in 6 of his 9 games in DraftKings. If we just take the simple rule of, going 3 times value for your quarterback, we basically need 16.2 points from him this week, something that he's going to accomplish almost every single week out just based purely on volume. I also think this Hackett offense is a little bit better for Allen Robinson. We're seeing him revive. So you have a stack partner to identify. For me, the main argument for him is 5,400 on DraftKings. It's his reasonable pricing on FanDuel. It's just, I understand he's not too much below the rates that we're talking about with, say, taking Cousins, for example, I think will be a more popular fit, kind of pivot angle. But I don't know. I think there's a shootout here brewing just because 2 bad secondaries. And I know that the Jacksonville has limited teams on a per-play basis, but they've also had really poor time of possession, so they give up a ton of yards to begin with. So I don't know. I just think Bortles is a guy, you don't feel comfortable about it, but I think in tournaments there's some interest.
Yeah, I'm going to be playing a lot of Blake Bortles in tournaments and probably won't watch the game till the 4th quarter, to be honest. Just just because
That's when it
Blake
starts.
Bortles rule.
Right.
Yeah, but like when I'm writing up guys, when I'm playing guys, I love what I look for is positive correlation. This is like an elite correlation spot for Bortles. You have a team in Jacksonville that 84% of their offensive touchdowns come through the air, the second highest rate in the league. 83% of the Lions touchdowns allowed have come through the air, the highest clip in the league. So it's a perfect correlation spot for Bortles to have. You know, if Vegas projects Jacksonville to score 3 touchdowns this game, I see that as Bortles has 3 touchdowns unless they get a defensive touchdown, which because Stafford's been taking care of the ball this season. So that I don't see that happening at home. So yeah, if he was like 6,200 or something, it'd be different. But 5,400, I mean, he's easily going to get 3 times salary for sure. And probably a little bit more. I think he could easily get 4 times in the spot.
Yeah, just to add to that, we always mention the fact that the Jaguars play in garbage time, and let's face it, it's true. In Bortles' career, in the first half, he has 4,100 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 23 interceptions. That's mediocre. The second half, he has 5,500 yards. He has 41 touchdowns rather, and 23 interceptions. Now, a lot of people will look at that and say, wow, that's such a big difference. Well, think about it. It's just 2 separate halves. The guy has 1,400 more yards and 20 more touchdowns. That doesn't mean, oh, wow, he just made a great adjustment at halftime. No, the Jaguars are down by 20 points.
Bortles never made a great adjustment in his life.
Yeah, it's just every time he's facing prevent for 2 quarters, and we see what happens in the NFL with prevent. They just let the guys get yards. They let the guys get touchdowns and try to let the clock run out. And that's exactly what happens to Bortles. A 20-touchdown difference between the first and second half for a guy's career is absurd. So just 5,400, I know a lot of people will think he's just a GPP play, but that volume is there. I think he's definitely safe to use in cash as well.
Yeah, I think he is too, but just don't watch the game until the late third quarter, early fourth.
Exactly. Yeah, if you're looking at 2:30, you're looking at your DraftKings or FanDuel or Rosters lineup, and you can see that Bortles has 7 points. Don't freak out. The touchdowns are coming. They always do. I have another quarterback.
Even against good defenses.
Yeah. One more quarterback I wanted to touch on before we finish out the position with your guys' picks. How about Jameis Winston against Kansas City? Marcus Peters has not practiced all week. I haven't seen what he's gone through today, but it's just a walkthrough most days on Friday, so I expect him to go through the walkthrough. They said he's going to play, but either way, I don't necessarily like the fact of a corner not practicing all week and then on Sunday facing a guy that's pretty good at football named Mike Evans. Guy's got 6 inches, about 30 pounds on Marcus Peters. We know that Peters gets the fumbles, gets the interceptions, makes all the flashy plays, but he does allow yards, does allow catches, and he does allow touchdowns. So for me, this is another one of those situations where I love the receiver on Evans. The guy throwing to him in Jameis Winston is also in play at just 5,900. He has 2 more passing touchdowns in 4 straight games, too. So he has been safe. We know the game flow is going to be in his favor, and he has a heck of a target in Mike Evans. So I think him, along with Stafford, make for 2 very excellent pivot plays if you want to stay off some of these other quarterbacks. So, Adam, I know it's Tyrod time. Take it away.
His price went up.
Finally.
A little bit. So he's scored at least 16 DraftKings points in 8 straight games. That's the highest streak in the league, I believe. I think him and Dak Prescott have both been pretty much like the most consistent quarterbacks in fantasy this year, if you look at it on that kind of basis. And he's got a couple high upside games in there, a 24-pointer, a 25-pointer mix in there. Dude's averaging six carries for 40 yards a game, so that boosts his floor and his upside there. And 8 of the 9 quarterbacks that faced the Bengals this season have scored at least 15 fantasy points. Their defense has been kind of bad this season that nobody really talks about. They're also generating 0 pressure. They're 31st in sack rate and sacks per game. They allowed 10th most passing yards, 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. He gets you there every single week. He's 5,600, which I think is still too cheap. He should probably be closer to 6K. He's averaging 19 DraftKings points per game, 18.8 FanDuel points per game. That's not a cash game play to me, which allows you to spend up elsewhere. I don't know what is. So, I got to write up Tyrod and Mariota in the same article this week, so I'm good. I mean, I can just be out, and you guys can take it the rest of the way.
Now, Jim, why don't you do that? We can just kind of let Adam simmer in his greatness of hope at his 2 quarterbacks of Mariota and Tyrod.
Oh, it's not
I know
hope.
you like Kirk, right? Don't you?
He likes the Tyrod Mariota marinade. But no, yeah, I like Kirk Cousins here. I mean, I think the situation is just that this Green Bay defense is definitively terrible lately. I mean, like the reason that Green Bay has to pass the ball 50 times a game or whatever it is, 48 times a game in the last month because they can't keep anybody off the scoreboard. You know, they scored 26 points 3 games in a row, and they've lost all of them. You know, I mean, like the Packers are just not very good right now. They've allowed 3.06 points per drive over the last 3 games. That's 31st in football. You know, that's a field goal per every time an opponent touches it. That's 27 points a game if you're going to take the normal drive allowance. You know, Rob Kelly Rob Kelly is nothing special, but I think he provides what he doesn't do is lose a lot of yardage and have a lot of negative plays. So he doesn't set up. He's the kind of guy who can get you 3 yards when you need 3 yards, and he'll get you 3 yards when you need 5 yards. You know, one of those football players. So, but that's helpful in the sense that there's manageable second and third downs and manageable exploitable second downs for Cousins because, first of all, you know, with Kelly on the field over the last 2 games, he's got a 96.6 QBR and a 57% first down rate in play action. That's well above what he was doing before because I don't think you could really honestly sell the play action because the team didn't seem committed to the run under Matt Jones. They were doing so much switching with Chris Thompson. I think there's just even though he's not a very valuable player fantasy-wise, Rob Kelly is helping support, I think, this kind of better balance and a little bit more sellability for the passing game.
Yeah, I like Cousins as well this week, too, and I'm going to talk about one of his receivers later in the show. But let's just recap quarterbacks real quick before we move on to running backs. Adam mentioned Mariota and Tyrod Taylor as 2 of his favorite plays. It just happens that they're 2 of his favorite players, and they're also in great spots this week. I mentioned Stafford and Winston as kind of some GPP pivots. And, of course, we talked about, as Jim mentioned, Andrew Luck. We mentioned Mariota as well, Bortles. We also all like Kirk Cousins. So there's a lot to choose from at quarterback this week. Now, just one guy I wanted to touch on before we move on. I just need to mention that Dak Prescott has had at least 3 times his salary in every game since week 2. So it's one of those situations where the guy has been incredibly consistent. He has a tough matchup against Baltimore, but if you're considering somebody else, you need to be safe. There he is.
On rosters, he's always cheap.
I think Jimmy Smith is looking extremely questionable for the Ravens, too, last time I checked.
That'll give him a benefit for sure.
Dez could eat.
Yeah. Watch out on rosters for that. If you're playing rosters, they've really underpriced Dak. It's almost like they expect Romo to be back or something. It's strange.
Yeah.
That is odd. I just checked on that, and you make a good point there, Jim. A guy like that cheap, regardless of the matchup, it's definitely worth playing.
He's priced like next to Bortles. He's priced next to – he's priced well below what he's actually doing.
Now, Adam, let's go to running backs. I know this is a week where a lot of people will be talking about a few core guys, but I think it's a little bit deeper week than people would like to give it credit for. So why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so at the top you have Le'Veon and DeMarco, but LeGarrette Blount is kind of ridiculous right now. The only game he hasn't scored a touchdown is the game against Buffalo where Jacoby Brissett started. He leads the NFL in rushing touchdowns with 12. He has the highest touch rate in the NFL, touching the ball on 57% of his snaps, the highest among all qualified running backs. We know, I mean, it hasn't even mattered this year because he's getting over 20 carries a game. He's just over 20 right now. But we know that Blount is a preferred play when New England are heavy favorites, and they're like 13-point road favorites here in San Francisco. No Gronk. So, like, if Gronk doesn't play, I know Bennett's very capable, but you got to think Blount, who probably has the highest touchdown equity of all running backs in the NFL right now, that even goes high, it goes higher and it goes up without Gronk probably. The volume's going to be there. Opposing offenses are averaging 35.2 rushing attempts per game against the Niners, the highest in the league. We know how bad this run defense is. They didn't allow 100 yards last week to David Johnson, so that's a plus. But yeah, LeGarrette Blount is just he's a lock for I think 80 yards and a touchdown. The only concern I think is if we get Mad Brady, who didn't score last week, lost a home game, and just goes for 5 touchdowns. But yeah, Blount's obviously in a great spot.
Jim, what do you think about running back this week? Is there anybody near the top you definitely want to have in your lineups?
Well, yeah, Bell's obviously, I think, the bell cow. I think sometimes we try to get I don't know, we try to get cute is the word some people use, or you can just say you try to get contrarian. and you try to avoid what's going to be naturally the chalk. I don't think this is a chalk week overall. I don't think that's the kind of week you're going to build. I think it's a week where you're going to want to be creative and kind of put together the puzzle with some contrarian pieces, but I don't think you need to avoid Bell in order to accomplish that. I understand the price is really it's demanding, but at the same time, it's commensurate with like what you're seeing from Mike Evans and Odell Beckham and even Antonio Brown. So it's a price that seems palatable when we pay up at receiver. And that's what this guy is anyway, right? He's got 24% target share since he's come back. That's like the same target share like Terrell Pryor has leading. That's the same.
Jim, since he returned from suspension, him and Antonio Brown both have 45 catches apiece.
It's crazy, right?
That's insane.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So, I mean, if you extrapolated his usage over a full season, I don't know, what would it be, 125 catches? Probably more than that. Like,
yeah, man.
He would break the all-time record for running backs. He might even threaten for the all-time record overall. I mean, he could do some Marvin Harrison stuff. So
yeah, Rich Rebar from RotoWorld in his article said that his 9.3 targets per game, if he was a receiver, that'd be 14th among receivers.
That's crazy. And the difference and the value is that in PPR formats, we count receptions, obviously. So his reception rate is going to be incredibly higher than your average wide receiver. So even if what you're really going to rate is the value of those targets is much higher in terms of what it drives the floor, in terms of what he can do. So look, there is going to be a week where he has 200 plus yards and three touchdowns. This might be that week. I mean, they're licking their chops. They're huge favorites. Obviously, the Cleveland's been soft this whole year, but it's really a get-right game. I mean, only 2 teams since 1990 have made the playoffs, after losing 5 straight games. They're on look, they're going to win this game. They've lost 4 straight, but really it's a slump buster game. It's a game for them to get things right and to get things going. I don't think Bell is going to just play a small, he's not going to take the foot off here, the gas, because there's nobody else to complement him. There is no back to come in. Toussaint's not going to come in to take his touchdowns. So this isn't even a bold prediction, but 200 total yards and 2 touchdowns is like my expectation for this guy. If you are going to pivot from him, I don't mind Theo Riddick. I know Jacksonville has had some respectable defensive rates, but I think this is just a unique usage situation where he's almost like a baby Bell. He doesn't have the rushing, but he's going to get 7 to 10 targets here, and that just provides such a nice floor. I think, he's more of a cash guy for me in terms of what he can do for you. Just getting 15 fantasy points on these PPR formats. He's really cheap on rosters. Like, I'll mention that. I know he's really well below market on rosters. So I think you have to find a cheap guy to afford Bell. So you have to be comfortable going with a Riddick or even a cheaper guy that we can talk about later.
Yeah, I think Riddick's like the most underrated player in fantasy. He's literally given you 15 to 17 touches every single game. And I talked about how I think Detroit's offense is going to, the Jaguars don't give up a lot of big plays. And we know a lot of the Detroit's passing offense is 5 to 6 yards down the field and to the running backs and to Golden Tate. So, yeah, Riddick's interesting, especially because there's a very popular, you alluded to it, very popular pass-catching running back that everybody's going to be on this week. So he's interesting there. I think my favorite running back this week, arguably, outside of obviously Le'Veon, might be Spencer Ware. He made his return last week from the concussion. Didn't have a great fantasy game, but he ran fine. He averaged 4.7 yards per carry against a tough Carolina run defense. He outsnapped Kendrick West 41-20, and I actually believe he left the game for a little bit and then came back, so he would have outsnapped him even. The snap rate would have been an even larger gap, and he's quietly giving you a safe floor. I mean, he's 5th in the NFL among running backs in receiving yards, and giving you like 70 yards from scrimmage every single week. And Tampa Bay, we look at them as a funnel defense that's better against the pass, but it really hasn't been the case. That's only been the case for like the first 3 weeks of the season. Since week 5, they're allowing 136.5 rushing yards per game, the 4th most in the NFL. Kansas City's relatively large home favorites. I love his price on DraftKings. He's $6K. I have him in so many of my lineups because if I'm making a lineup where, because I'm not going to have 100% Le'Veon, so if I'm making a lineup where I don't have Le'Veon, I'm pretty much playing Spencer Ware, and he's $400 cheaper than Blunt, so I think he's an interesting pivot there with similar upside. I love Spencer Ware this week.
Let me talk about a high price pivot, and I don't think a lot of people will be on him this week. And I think that's a mistake. David Johnson. I feel like Adam here, but it's one of these situations where it's one of these situations where this matchup I think is good. Now I know that sounds weird, but hear me out here against Minnesota. Excuse me. The Redskins last week, Minnesota allowed 28 carries for 128 yards on the ground, and the backs caught 4 passes. 2 weeks ago, Theo Riddick went 14 for 70 on the ground, near 5 yards a carry. 3 weeks ago, Jordan Howard had 26 for 153 and a touchdown, and he also had 4 catches for 50 yards. If you want to go back even farther than that, 4 weeks ago, the Eagles had 26 for 101, and their backs caught 3 passes for 50 yards on just 4 targets. So Minnesota has struggled a little bit against running backs, and none of these guys are even close to David Johnson. We talked about Darren Sproles, Jordan Howard, Theo Riddick, and Rob Kelly. So give me David Johnson in that matchup, considering the guy's got over 1,200 yards from scrimmage. He has 10 touchdowns in 9 games. His price is dropped, and you're getting him at about a $1,000 discount from Le'Veon Bell. So for those of you that want to be contrarian, I talked about game theory earlier with quarterbacks. This is a great spot for David Johnson, and I don't think a lot of people see it that way. So be sure to consider him in your lineups.
Yeah, and like he's gonna go overlooked because he had a good fantasy game against San Francisco, but he didn't go gangbusters necessarily. So some people might be a little bit let down. Yeah, dude, he's 13 straight games, full games with 100 scrimmage yards, and Arizona can't really pass block right now, so I think they're going to keep relying on him on the ground. I'll always play David Johnson, man. I have no problem with him ever.
There's one pass-catching quarterback or running back here that I think all of us are on. So, Jim, why don't you take that away? Florida Notre Dame running back, receiver, safety, kicker, punter, long snapper. He did everything there.
The Swiss Army knife at Notre Dame. I mean, it's a guy who last year was, among draft-eligible prospects, was first among running backs in college in yards per route run. So he's got that pedigree. I think one thing that happens when we identify a guy as a talented receiver and he kind of gets archetyped or put into this position is he's a receiving back. But CJ Prosise is 6 foot 220. His physical comparables are like Ryan Matthews and Telvin Coleman. So it's not exactly a guy who's only isolated to this change of pace work. Not to say that we're suggesting that, but I think sometimes that happens. The impression gets felt like that, and the idea that he's only going to be a third down guy and that Rawls is going to completely dominate early downs. Well, Sheil Kapati of ESPN, formerly a great Eagles beat writer, he's really tapped in. He brings in a lot of good info. And what I like is that he kind of makes a leap based on what he's seeing in practice. He's not just going to take the coach speak, because the coach speak is Carroll's saying, oh, he's ready for a huge workload. We've heard that before from him talking about Rawls. We haven't seen it yet this year. Thomas Rawls topped out at the 26% snap rate this year. I know he was hurt, but also you were dealing with a situation where Prosise was actually playing early as well in that passing role. I think you're going to see that again here, where at the most, Rawls tops out at 35% snap rate, kind of like a Terrence West kind of role, except the difference is that instead of just being Kenneth Dixon, CJ Prosise is going to have work early down and in the receiving phase. So, look, Kapadia thinks he leads the team in snaps and touches from the backfield. The Eagles, we know that they've been good against running backs, in a lot of senses, but they're tough in space. I think you can exploit these guys in space. I think you can exploit not only Kendricks, who doesn't play enough right now, but you can exploit the middle of the field against the Eagles, pretty effectively. The other thing is this is the 5th pass heaviest team in the league, Seattle. So this isn't some misnomer. That's when you adjust for game flow. This isn't some misnomer that they're just relying on the pass to run. They can't run right now.
No.
They can't run. So Rawls might solve that in some ways. I don't think he does this week, especially with Benny Logan back in the fold. I don't know. To me, it reads like a contrarian week to get yourself Prosise. Maybe it's not too contrarian. Maybe the crowd's on it. But either way, 6 to 8 targets, I think, for him around there. 5 to 8 targets, pretty nice expectation. This is how they're going to move the ball. I think they're going to move the ball with Baldwin and Prosise more than they do with, say, Graham or going vertical.
Yeah, here's the thing with Prosise. He wouldn't be as chalky or popular if he didn't play in the Sunday night game, because don't they lock their pricing for the next week while that game's on? Don't they do their pricing while the Sunday night game? So
Absolutely.
and then he went, he didn't go off, but he had a really good game. He had over 100 scrimmage yards and ran really well. So his price didn't move. So but yeah, like you saw what Theo Riddick did against them at home against the Eagles. this Eagles defense is not the same on the road. So yeah, I have a lot of CJ Pro sets. He just allows you to fit so much in. And like even if FanDuel is not a full PPR site, I still would play him on FanDuel. He's gonna see what at worst 8 carries.
Right.
So
yeah, absolutely. 20 between carries and target, 20 of those combined is not out of the realm at all. And I think he has a chance to get 20 total touches. So just 4,200 on DraftKings in PPR formations or formats, considering the fact that other sites you can use him for cheap as well. I know on FanDuel, he's just $4,900, which I know it's not a full PPR site, but that is so much cheaper than these other backs. You're talking about $2,500 to $4,000 cheaper than these other backs on that site.
Yeah, and people see a pass catching running back on FanDuel and go, okay, I can't play him. It's not like you don't get any points. It's not like you catch the pass and you don't get points. Like you get the yardage, you get the half point. It's not like you just catch a pass and it's like, well, that doesn't help me at all. Like I think that's a little bit overlooked.
And plus, if we've watched enough Eagles this year, we know they don't tackle in the secondary. So if he gets anywhere past that second level,
yeah,
we've already seen big plays against the Saints last week. He's one of those guys who can leak out into the secondary. And again, it allows you to afford your David Johnsons if you want to be full contrarian or pay up for Bell. If you take the average of your backfield and you can really lower it, then I think it allows you to spend up and still get that cost certainty.
Yeah. You know who else doesn't tackle well? The Indianapolis Colts. And they're going against DeMarco Murray, who's been right there with Ezekiel Elliott in terms of yards after contact this season. He's locked in for 23 to 25 touches. The Colts giving up 115 yards per game on the ground. 8.4 missed tackles per game is bottom 3 in the NFL. The Titans' offensive line has been kind of, I know Mariota and DeMarco have been the talk, but this has been a top 5 unit in the NFL in terms of the offensive line. They're creating 2.5 yards before contact per attempt, according to Pro Football Focus, the second highest number in the league behind Buffalo. So he's going to have plenty of running room here. You know what Tennessee does in the red zone. You know that Derrick Henry and these other backs are not even close to being part of the equation here, even when they're healthy. So, yeah, I mean, if you're looking for a pivot, DeMarco is a couple hundred cheaper than Le'Veon Bell and is in just as good of a spot, just about, and doesn't have the upside, but he's right there for me. By the way, we didn't really talk about it, but have you guys seen the weather they're expecting in Cleveland?
Yeah, Brian Healy actually touched on that in his piece this week.
It's like 30-mile-an-hour winds with snowstorms.
Yeah, it could be one of those situations where Le'Veon just gets the touches because they have no choice. So he's going to get them either way. This literally, as Jim was saying, 200 yards and a few touchdowns is not out of the realm at all here. Yeah.
I also real quick, if you're playing the full slate, the other Murray, Latavius. I know it's the Monday night game in Mexico City, but since the bye week, he's kind of emerged as what we thought he would be, the every down workhorse back. He's seen 16 touches in every game since the coming off the bye. We know that you beat Houston on the ground, and they're bottom 5 in terms of yards given up after first contact. So Latavius Murray can get some work done here, and I love his price. If you're playing on that full slate, he's $5,500, I believe, on DraftKings. I think that's really, really cheap.
One guy I wanted to mention it back before we move on to wide receiver is a lot of people will call it a shot in the dark, but I think this is the week for Todd Gurley, guys. I think this is the week where he's going to break out.
Yeah, I noticed when writing, he's high up there on the ratings.
Yeah, he is. He's very high up, and I think there's a lot of factors for that, and one of the reasons being his volume. 167 carries, 26 catches. The guy's had 193 touches in 9 games. The only other players with his basically with those touches, with those snaps and touch rate, Melvin Gordon, Ezekiel Elliott, Lamar Miller, Matt Forte, LaShawn McCoy, and DeMarco Murray. All those guys are elite backs every single week, and they cost nearly twice of what Todd Gurley costs. Now, I know Miami's defensive line has been good, but with that production and with that volume, to be one of the top running backs in terms of fantasy points. It's going to happen at some point this year. I won it against Miami this year, who I think is going a little bit overrated against the run. They're allowing over 4 yards per carry. Todd Gurley is only $5K on DraftKings. if his name wasn't Todd Gurley and you knew how bad the Rams offense has been this year, you probably would take a look at anybody at 5K getting that touch rate. So that's what I want to look at for this week. It is a shot in the dark. I think I would only use him in 20, maybe 25% of my lineups in GPP if I was multi-entering. But I think this is a good situation for him because when you really think about it, he's $800 more than Procise. He's less than Latavius Murray. He's $4,000 less than Le'Veon Bell. And you know he's going to get the work. So if he gets a touchdown or two, he's paying off that price in a big way. Let's move on to receivers here. I think the news that Adam just mentioned with the fact that Antonio Brown will be playing in a game that could be snowy, windy, rainy, all kinds of nasty, basically, means that the number one receiver here by far, I think, is Odell Beckham. Adam, why don't you tell everybody why?
Because people are overreacted. People who overreacted in the beginning of the season forgot to realize he's one of the best players in the NFL. So all that kind of panic, and he's has 6 touchdowns over his last 5 games or 5 over his last 6. He's been scoring at a high rate. Eli's playing better, and these two are so much better at home. 74% of Odell Beckham's yards and 83% of his touchdowns have come at home this season. And the Bears' defense is much worse on the road. They're giving up 17.5 points per game at home this season, which is one of the better numbers in the NFL. But when they're on the road, they're giving up 29 points per game, which is 28th in the NFL. So I think Odell Beckham. I know Tracy Porter and the Bears double teamed Mike Evans last week, but I don't know how you do that against Odell Beckham, who's going to be in the slot a ton. He's seen 8 targets at least in every single game. The Bears are allowing the most fantasy points per game to receivers. I'd prefer Odell Beckham over Antonio Brown. And what do you say, $700 on DraftKings? Yes, please.
Jim, what do you think? You have a thought in your number one receiver for this week between those guys?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go with Mike Evans, Mr. Just the volume, the market share is ridiculous. And I agree with Adam. I think it's pretty clear that last year's the outlier in this guy's career trend. I mean, in the career arc, this guy is an historic touchdown maker, whereas last year had the confluence of a rookie quarterback. He came in out of shape and beaten up a little bit, and never really got on track in terms of getting in that chemistry. But, they talk about breakout age and all these things. And this guy was a super special player in college. At 18, this guy is one of these guys who's been pretty special at a high level at a young age. So he's kind of like he's got that phenom index to him. So obviously, I mean, there's some Randy Moss to this guy in terms of what he can do downfield. That's sort of blasphemous, but the idea of being 6'5", the way he can move, and the way he can also win jump balls, you don't see that combination so often in this NFL. Like in a league of freaks, the guy's a freak. But yeah, the other thing too is, they don't move Marcus Peters around. I mean, Marcus Peters is going to play, but he doesn't shadow. So if he can get Phillip Gaines, and even if they double him, they put Ron Parker on top of him, or even Eric Berry, who, I mean, this is power forward playing against point guards right now. That's how big this guy is, and more importantly, it's volume driven. He doesn't need to catch every ball because he's going to have 15 chances. So for some of the reasons you like Jameis Winston in terms of, I think they're going to have to pass to win here. I think that's one of the reasons that you're going to see, Evans get 15 targets.
Yeah, there's no way I don't see them going into Kansas City and running the ball. And, yeah, you have to think after being – I mean, I know they won, but, there's no way they don't try to get Evans on the other side against Gaines, who I believe he's banged up too. So, we've seen these teams with their elite receivers have them line up against Gaines and have big games. Antonio Brown went for 564 and 2 in that Sunday night game where the game was over by halftime. He would have went nuclear if that game was competitive. Amari Cooper went for 13 and 129 against them. Michael Thomas 10 for 130. Moncrief went 4 for 41 in the touchdown against Gaines. He also had a 40-yard touchdown called back. Allen Robinson went for 776 and 1 a couple weeks ago. Benjamin last week was dominating Gaines on the slants. He went 7 for 84. Didn't score, but Gaines has been a guy to target all season long.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you guys on Evans.
My nose is really itchy in case you couldn't tell.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I definitely think that Evans is a top target this week. I like Odell too, But the way I'm going to be looking at it, at least on DraftKings, is the difference in price there between the two of them is pretty similar. And I think it's a big discount from Antonio Brown. So it is worth looking at those two with the weather out of Pittsburgh. But with that being said, keep an eye on that, because if that clears up, Antonio Brown by far has the best matchup. I think everybody's just worried about the fact that game could be over with about 11 minutes left in the first quarter.
But like Pittsburgh, we do this with them on the road. I mean, the Miami game, we're expecting Le'Veon and Antonio Brown to just dominate, and they came out flat. And I know it's Cleveland, but I was talking to my brother, and he's picking Pittsburgh for Survivor, and you would think it's a logical pick, but it's just something about Pittsburgh on the road. They always seem to let us down. I mean, I'm not saying that they're bad plays, but if this game even stays remotely competitive, then these guys could go off if the weather's not too, concerning.
Absolutely. Now, Jim, you want to talk about your second-tier receivers here? because the guys I have I think we have a little bit of ways to go in terms of price. I have some cheap guys that I've mentioned.
Sure, yeah. And just in regards to the weather thing, I think Brian Burke, he used to have that site Advanced Analytics. Now he works with ESPN Stats and Info. But he in terms of weather, one of the only correlations is wind. And I think it's when it gets over 17 miles per hour is when you start seeing some sort of, dip in passing efficiency. It's not that dramatic. So unless there's sustained winds over 20 miles per hour, I think people should be confident. But if that is the case, it's one of the only things that he did data-wise that actually suggests that.
I think the last thing I saw on Twitter was around 25 to 30. So
I mean, if it holds, look, we're playing weatherman here, but that's important in DFS. I think DFS has brought that into. I think in season long, it's not as vital because you're not gonna get off any shares that you have of Antonio Brown. That's ridiculous. Right. So that's why I think people don't understand the reason that meteorology and that stuff actually factors in, because we're talking about a single game slice. But in any case, at receiver, I like Doug Baldwin. No weather issues here. The thing that he has going for him is the fact that, this time last year through 10 weeks, he was ranked 40th among receivers in fantasy points per game. And then he went on to be the number one receiver from that point on. Now, obviously, that was sustained by an amazing touchdown rate. But we've seen this happen with Seattle's offense 3 years in a row now, where we get to week 8, we get to week 9, we're like, what's wrong with Wilson? Now, this year was a more extended version. It also involved injuries. But at the same time, the team is still a contender, and Wilson is starting to look like Wilson again. The rushing is not there, but this guy hasn't relied on rushing as much as, say, a Tyrod or as much as a Cam, in the sense that he's also historically efficient from the pocket. This is a 8 yards plus yards per attempt kind of guy, kind of historic efficiency. And verticality. I think they have the highest average depth of target in the league. So even though the volume isn't always there with Seattle, he pushes the ball downfield. Doug Baldwin, obviously, he could be on the precipice of another one of these huge touchdown runs. He just had 3 last week. The week before, he barely missed another one, had 89 yards. And here's the other thing. I'm an Eagles fan. I know how bad our secondary can prove, especially on the outside. Jalen Mills is terrible. It's not his fault, I guess. He's a 7th-round rookie, but Nolan Carroll jumps routes, and Leonis McKelvin is often in the wrong spot. They only have one cornerback ranked in the top 102 on Pro Football Focus, and that's McKelvin at 62 among cornerbacks in coverage. So I don't know. The volume isn't really there for him, but the upside certainly is. And I think touchdowns for your number 2 receiver are what differentiates you and makes you scale up in tournaments. And a multi-touchdown game can win you a week.
Absolutely. And the thing with Baldwin, I agree with you here. I think it's a great play. Even if by some chance he doesn't catch a touchdown, which I think we both agree that he definitely has a chance to catch at least one. If he doesn't, he still has the floor with the catches and with the yards expected against the secondary, given how the Seattle offense has been working for the past few weeks, that floor is safe enough to use anyway. Now you add in those touchdown probabilities or possibilities, I guess I should say. It's one of those situations where he has that floor and he has that upside. So he's a great player. I agree with you a lot on Baldwin. The guy I wanted to talk about here, Tyreek Hill. You guys may remember last week on RC Live, I mentioned him as a play simply because the Chiefs have to move the ball somewhere. I know Spencer Ware came back last week. He was banged up a little bit. But with Jeremy Maclin out last week, Tyreek Hill saw 10 catches, 13 targets. He also carried the ball once. So that means they looked his way 14 times. Going to be something similar again this week, I think, as they face the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have given up 112 catches for 1,600 yards and 13 touchdowns to wide receivers this week or this year. Only 78 passes to wide receivers have been incomplete. I look at that a lot because to me, it tells me that there's a chance for Tyreek Hill to catch a large amount of his targets. We know how inefficient Tampa Bay has been against receivers, as I just mentioning all of the short passes that should be thrown Tyreek Hill's way. At 4,500, he has a very high chance to be successful in PPR. And with 8 or 9 catches comes those points, not to mention the yards and the touchdown upside he has. At 4,500, he's one of the best plays of the week for me, I think, on DraftKings and PPR formats. You guys like him? Adam, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I love him. Playing him in seasonal with Julio and other guys on a bye. I'm playing him in DFS. With Tyreek Hill, arguably the fastest player in the NFL, you want big plays. And that's what Tampa Bay's secondary allows. They allow the second most 20 and 40-yard passing plays. Big reason why I targeted Alshon last week, but no, the Bears just don't want us to have nice things, I guess. But according to PFF, this dude's being targeted on over 36% of his routes run. So, like, when he's on the field, he's getting targeted. And now, of course, he's going to be on the field more. Macklin surely not going to play. He hasn't practiced all week. And he saw 13 targets the first game he was kind of thrust into a larger role. So he's one of my favorite plays, price included, at wide receiver this week. He's so explosive and fast, and Tampa Bay's corners cannot tackle to save their lives. So, yeah, you could be looking at a big game here for Tyreek Hill. He's going to be in a lot of my lineups.
I think he matches this Andy Reid bubble screen kind of world where, like, he likes to put it in his hands and see what he can do. And this is one of those guys in the NFL that, you know, when you see what he can do, it's pretty impressive. I mean, yeah, it's really just about it's high. What I like is a big play guy with a high percentage role. He's not being asked to get the ball 20, 30 yards downfield like a Sammy Coates. Well, obviously Coates, you know what I mean is usually these big speedster guys like
Jackson.
Yeah, and Lockett, they have these low percentage rolls, so you're kind of banking on a homer. Whereas this is a guy who actually is going to be fed a lot of reasonable high percentage targets. That's what I like about it. Yeah,
and I'll see 1 or 2 carries too, and you never know if he could break one of those. So, yeah, going up a little bit. I like Dante Moncrief again. He's his last 10 full games with Andrew Luck, he's has 8 touchdowns. He scored on over 10% of his targets from Luck since the start of last season. Huge touchdown guy that nobody really talks about. I like him more in cash because the yardage hasn't really been there because T.Y. Hilton's still in the mix, obviously, and gets a lot of the big play yardage. But this is a bottom 5 or 6 secondary in Tennessee that's given up a lot of production of wide receivers the last couple weeks. Again, that 53-point total, I like this game a lot. I really don't hate anybody from this game. And then Allen Robinson with Bortles, as Jim talked about. Darius Slay's expected to be back, but I think Darius Slay's kind of overrated in terms of fearing him in DFS. Like he's a fine cornerback, but he's not somebody I'm not afraid of. And I talked about correlations. We want touchdowns, and it's an offense that the majority of their touchdowns come through the air, a defense that the majority of the touchdowns they allow come through the air, and the Jaguars are calling pass 63 times to 24 rushes inside the red zone. And 15, 12, and 13 targets for Robinson the last couple of weeks. The catch rate's gone up too. So maybe Bortles is getting a little bit more accurate, which would be incredible.
I think the routes are also more manageable right now. If you like, I watched some of the tape on Robinson. He's not being asked to do as many exotic, like multi-move. They're kind of just saying, go downfield and get the ball. It's a little bit. I think they've simplified things a little bit. Whereas Olsen, the coordinator, I think was making things unnecessarily complicated. When really you have one of the. I mean, the tape still shows that Robinson's amazing. It's not really a Robinson issue. It's obviously a Bortles issue. A guy that I like to save a little bit of money on here is Eli Rogers. I know we're talking about avoiding this game, but honestly, they're still going to have to pass the ball to move the ball at some level. And the thing is, it's high percentage. It doesn't really matter really what the weather is when a guy's getting the ball 4 or 5 yards, from scrimmage. And that's what Rodgers does. He's really more just the pricing is so attractive for you to pay up for your Evans and still get your Bell. You need to really punt somewhere. And I think this is a guy who can punt and still get you 10 points and has upside for more. The reason that I like him, obviously, is Sammy Coates is really banged up. 2 broken fingers, has only caught 1 of his last 11 targets. Since that dream breakout game, he's really done nothing. Rodgers has 17% of the Steelers' targets since over the last 2 weeks. That's a really nice floor, kind of, if he continue to have that. So I think we're having a little bit of a revival of what he was doing early in the year. I think this is more of who he is. He's this 15 to 20% target share guy that Ben can trust to move the ball. It's almost like a little bit of an Edelman role.
Yeah, and slot guys have absolutely destroyed Cleveland this year. Jordan Matthews, Landry, Steve Smith. They've been getting just crushed by slot guys. So, yeah, he's super affordable too. He's interesting because you have him and Tyreek in the same price range.
Yeah, it's crazy because honestly, you could use both. Honestly, I mean, you could have both of them as higher floor plays, and then you can afford the Le'Veon and the Mike Evans and be able to pay up for Mariota or a top quarterback. So it's interesting there. I think that those two guys are excellent punts in cash. The other guy I'm looking at for cash games, another slot player, is Jamison Crowder against Green Bay. We mentioned earlier that the Packers defense can't cover anybody. And honestly, if us three were the receivers against them, we would all have chances in DFS.
Bro, I run good routes.
Yeah, you would be probably about 3,600. I know I'd be about 1,200, the only player ever under 3,000 on DraftKings. But it would still be worth using. I know Jim's about a $5,700 player, so we may have to fade him in tournaments. But what I do think about Crowder this week, he faces that defense we just mentioned is horrible. Looking at the last couple of weeks, the slot receivers or guys in the middle of the field against the Packers. Delaney Walker, 9 for 124 and a touchdown, and Kendall Wright also had a touchdown on 2 catches. Those guys play in the middle of the field. 2 weeks ago, T.Y. Hilton had 6 for 82. Jack Doyle also had 5 for 61 in the middle of the field. Philip Dorsett caught some passes across the middle of the field as well against the Packers. Before that, Taylor Gabriel, 3 for 70 and a touchdown. And the Austin Hooper game, 5 catches for 41 yards. All those were in the middle of the field. Jamison Crowder has seen 28 targets in the last 3 games. The game flow should be favorable. This should be a game where a lot of points are scored. I'm looking for the guy that is the most attractive option to Kirk Cousins when he drops back in the middle of the field against the Packers. That's exactly what this guy is for sure.
Yeah, and that's what Washington's offense is with Jordan Reed and Crowder. And Deshaun Jackson's a game-time decision that I just saw. So he might not even play. Like, that's going to be their offense. And I think Jamison Crowder probably the most underrated wide receiver in the NFL. Like, Deshaun Jackson or Pierre Garçon, one or both of them are not going to be in Washington next year because this guy's been so good.
Yeah, he's been an excellent player for them, and a big reason why that offense has been able to move the ball down the field without that big play threat in Deshaun Jackson. So, guys, let's recap receiver real quick. We talked about Odell and Mike Evans being 2 of the top options. We also mentioned some guys in the middle to upper tier like Allen Robinson, Doug Baldwin, Dante Moncrief. I just mentioned Jamison Crowder. And, of course, the cheaper pivots we can use in those lineups are Tyreek Hill and Eli Rogers, who all 3 of us, I think we all agree on that. Let's move on to tight end. This position is not fun this week, so we're going to make it quick. Rob Gronkowski is probably not going to play, considering he's not even cleared to fly yet with the lung injury. So, Adam, we'll start with you. If you had to pick one tight end this week, who are you looking at?
It's funny. I think a tight end is pretty good this week. I mean, last week it was horrible, but this week you have Jordan Reed, Delaney Walker, Greg Olsen last night we thought was a good play. Marty Bennett. So there's a lot of good guys. I love Jordan Reed. I think the Washington passing game can do whatever they want on Sunday night. We talked about Green Bay struggling in the middle of the field. They're allowing the 7th most fantasy points to tight ends. They've allowed 3 touchdowns to tight ends. This defense in Green Bay is just in like self-destruct mode. So I think Jordan Reed's in a good spot.
Jim, what about you? One tight end this week, if you had to pick, who would it be?
I'm going to take some savings and go with he's chalky, but still the upside is there. I'm going to go with Martellus Bennett. I mean, here's the theory is it's easy to tell. I mean, first of all, Tom Brady, 47% of his fantasy points and 35% of his targets have gone to tight ends.
Yeah, that's a good stat.
So and even when they haven't relied on Gronk, I still think formation-wise they rely on the formation enough. It's just also he's had 3 games with 100 yards this year, 2 of which were without Brady. So, he's been a productive guy. He's a great yards after the catch guy. I mean, it's not just a situation thing where it's like Scott Chandler or some kind of stiff. This is a guy who's a real playmaker at the position. I think he'd be a tight end one on most NFL teams. So, with Gronk ailing and looking so tough to trust here, I think Bennett's the guy. Even if Gronk were to play, is there a final word on Gronk?
I don't think so. We'll probably get it within the next couple hours. I mean,
now the week's trending. It's hard to.
There's no way he plays. Like,
so I mean, Bennett's the guy. I mean, and I know you said one, but one more guy would be if Bennett is too chalky for you in tournaments. Actually, Eric Ebron a little bit too. He actually might be the stack that I would do with Stafford.
I wrote Ebron up in that tournament article, the same tournament article. He's got 14 catches his last 2 weeks, 7-7, and I love Marvin Jones, but Jalen Ramsey's been shutting guys down that are better than Marvin Jones. So this could be an Ebron Riddick game.
The one tight end I'm looking at, of course, I think Martellus Bennett is excellent in cash games because of the fact that he's going to play a million snaps. Even if by some chance Gronk does play, which I don't think is going to happen, he's still going to play a million snaps. So we know the play action works a lot in New England. He has a chance to score a touchdown or two. He gets a ton of targets over 4 in basically all but one game this year. But all my picks so far this has been GPP picks or a little bit of pivot. So I'm going to go Julius Thomas here against Detroit. The Lions have given up 52 catches for 522 yards and 9 touchdowns to tight ends this year on 69 targets. 52 catches on 69 targets, guys. 17 incompletions out of 70 targets, essentially. That's horrible. They're allowing 2.3 fantasy points per target to tight ends, which is unreal. Julius Thomas had 10 targets last week. I don't think he sees that again, but he has at least 4 targets in all but one game of the season. So if you just extrapolate those numbers, that's at least 8, considering his price and the upside to score a touchdown against Detroit. I think he makes for an excellent play. But you can play him with Bortles, because a lot of people will be using Bortles and Allen Robinson. I think Bortles to Julius Thomas could definitely be a thing this week. All right, guys, bold calls, my favorite part of the show. I'm going to start this off. I don't know if it's going to be too bold or not, but I think Jamison Crowder, 10 catches this week, definitely has a chance to go over 100 yards with that. But I think 10 catches for Crowder is my bold call. So, Adam, what about you?
Yeah, we'll stick with the mid-priced kind of cheap receivers here. Tyreek Hill, we talked about him a lot today. I think he's at least a top 15 receiver this week. Just with Mac on out, we saw what the usage was. We know as Jim talked about, his targets are going to be high percentage targets, and he has the opportunity to break one any single time with that speed and Tampa Bay's tackling deficiencies. So,
Jim, what about you? I know your bold calls have been something that a lot of people have been paying attention to this season. So let's hear about yours.
I think Bortles isn't just good, but I think it's almost going to be reminiscent of that Thursday night game against the Titans where he just went crazy when it didn't matter. I think he has 303, actually 330 and 3. We'll go with a lot of threes. I think he has 330 yards and 3 touchdowns.
3 picks.
And 3 picks. And none of it matters because he's still going to put up 24 fantasy points. So ride the Bortles train while he's still here. If there's a bad call, I think this Jordan Howard doghouse thing is real. It's just frustrating. I would avoid Jordan Howard. I don't think he's a top 20 back this week.
Interesting. Very interesting there. That is our bold calls, and that essentially wraps up RC Live for Week 11. Let's look at all the things we have on RotoCurve real quick. We have all of our tools, cheat sheets for every position. We have a lineup builder up, red zone stats. We have an entire database of snaps, targets, touches, everything you can possibly imagine to help make your DFS lineups in NFL. We have consensus ranks with Ricky Sanders, myself. We're still trying to catch Adam. I don't know how we're going to do it this late in the season, so be sure to check his picks out. And if you want to look at Ricky's and I's, if for some reason you don't like Adam. But the next thing we have is Brian Healy. The guy qualified again. He now has 5 live finals in the last year. He's been on an incredible run. Be sure to check his cheat sheet out. He had a lot of interesting thoughts about the Steelers games. Be sure to check that out. Adam has his cash and tournament picks up. He also has a bargains article up. This comes up each Wednesday. We know Jim has an excellent rosters market watch piece, one of my favorite pieces to read each and every week. That is up as well. All this content for under $1 a day. Now, also, if you go over to RotoCurve right now, you can see that there's a banner towards the top. We have a chance to win 2 tickets to the big game. Please be sure to go check that out. It's an excellent package, including all sorts of things you can do. So be sure to check that out, rotocurve.com/big-game. One more thing, we have a free roll for the NBA tonight. For those of you trying to look to build the bankroll, please be sure to check that out as well. NBA free roll is up on the site. You can find that most places as well. This has been RotoCurve Live for Week 11, as always presented by Rosters.com. That's Adam Pfeifer and Jim McCormick. I'm Josh Collacchi. Good luck this week.